Nobody knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
A deranged house isn't a bad way of putting it. Such houses are described in the Bible as leprous. Before that, in Homer's phrase for the underworld, a house of Hades.
And you really believe that this was possible? That apes were systematically taken from this planet to another and altered by selective breeding, atomic surgery, methods we can't guess, and return...
Hi everybody, welcome back to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene and Mark, and with me is my co-host, and I will remember his name today because I've got it written down, Mark Johnson.
You know,
I nearly said Johansson.
it never ceases to amaze me. We've been working together, about 6 years now? And,
yeah, 6 years.
Still can't get my name right.
No. Well.
But it's one of your endearing qualities, I think.
I think so, too.
Okay.
I like to forget who you are.
Yes, I know a lot of people would.
Right, so where we go tonight then, Mark?
Well, first of all, I hear we have a new royal baby arrived today.
Yes, 1 minute, I believe 1 minute past 11 this morning. And, yeah, little boy. Now, it's either going to be, I should imagine, Arthur or James. Now, given the royal families always is copying whatever I do. You know, I had William. So what happens? Diana had William. You know, they're always, I reckon it'll be James because I've got the James. I'm really hoping it's James, actually. I wouldn't want to be called anything. Well, it's either Arthur or Albert. It could be Albert.
Well, I know the royal family is following your Facebook page, and they're just waiting to see how you name your children so they know how they're going to name it from there.
Well, if you look at my Facebook page, there are quite a few crown princes on there.
Ah, from Saudi Arabia?
You didn't know. Yes, Saudi Arabia. There's a few, what would have been the royal family from France.
Oh.
Yeah,
they don't have royal families over there anymore.
No, they chopped their heads off.
Yeah, that tended to happen a lot back then.
Well, yeah. They've still got the guillotine, I believe. Anyway, we've got a royal baby, everybody, and I am really chuffed. I know a lot of people are not royalists, but I am a royalist. I think they do a fairly good job.
You know what? As the Yank here, and not knowing as much about the royal family, I will have to say that, the HBO series, The Crown, really kind of brings it into perspective. I really teaches you a lot about what goes on. Sure, a lot of it is dramatized, didn't really happen that way, but it really gave me more of an affinity towards the royal family and how things are done over there, especially when they were fighting all that tradition when Elizabeth took over in the 50s and 60s.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
But, when you think about the way it was in Victoria's time, did you ever see that program, Victoria?
No, I did not.
That was a series. Now, that's a series you've got to watch. It's all about Victoria from when she was a young girl to the time she took her throne, and then she had her children. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It was called Victoria, and the theme music to it was fantastic as well, but I can't remember what that's called.
Well, we have we always talk about the Victorian age. It was just this golden age of the Victorian times. And, we have a lot of, where I live here in New Jersey, a lot of these Victorian homes, these old mansions that go back. Beautiful, beautiful homes.
Well, I'm in one now.
And there you are.
Yeah.
We also want to mention to our listeners, now we weren't on last week because Irene had a round of the flu, and
no, I didn't. I had laryngitis, people.
Well, I'm
sorry, I lost my voice for 2 weeks, and he was absolutely in bliss over it because I couldn't nag him.
Couldn't bother me one bit. It's like, Mark, can you please? What's that? Speak up. Well, it didn't help.
If he didn't want to do something, he just made out he didn't hear me.
Well, in a real turn of irony, our guest also had laryngitis, so we had to cancel last week. So, unfortunately, we couldn't talk about. But we'll mention it now with a shout out to the fact that Art Bell passed away unexpectedly last week, and
Very sad.
very sad. Now, this show broadcasts on Monday nights, also on the Dark Matter Digital Network, which was Art's network. And, when he stepped down, Heather Wade took over for Midnight in the Desert. And so we're still the lead-in show for that show every Monday night. So if you miss us on our standard Wednesday nights, you can tune in on Monday nights on Dark Matter and hear us. So, talked a lot with Keith Rowland, who runs the network. And, I know that they're still figuring some things out. I know Heather is pretty distraught over what happened and has taken some time off. So hopefully my mantra is the show must go on. I hope things continue forward with them. They have all of our support, most definitely, Keith and Heather and the whole gang over there.
Yeah, that's right. And our condolences go to the family.
Very much so. To Art's family, his wife, his children, our definite condolences. So,
yeah, such a shock.
It is. It is. And you know what? It ties in tonight with our guest a bit, who is very much a friend of Art's and collaborated with Art on a book and has been on his show many times. And we are talking about tonight, our guest is Whitley Strieber. Now, Whitley, for those of you who may not know him as well, is an author who's written dozens of fiction and nonfiction books, most notably noted for Communion, back in the 80s. And now, but we are here to talk to him tonight about his new book, which I just finished reading and I found absolutely compelling, called The Afterlife Revolution. So Whitley, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm sorry it's under sad circumstances. Certainly for me. Art was a dear friend, a really very close friend, and it was hard. And it's hard for Heather too. I'm sure she'll get herself back together, but we were all pretty shocked.
Yeah, it must have been a terrible shock for you, Whitley.
Well, it was. It was a big shock. There was a.
Well, I think it was for the whole of the radio world, wasn't it? Really?
Right.
He was a pioneering, a talk show host, and one of the best ones who ever spoke into a microphone. He was brilliant, and he'll be missed. He hadn't been on the air for a long time. He had COPD. I don't know if they call it the same thing over there as they do here. It's emphysema from smoking, and he began to feel troubled by that about 10 years ago, and started leaving the air and then trying to come back again, and he would run out of breath, and it would be pretty scary on the air when that happened. And finally he retired, and the disease progressed in the way it usually does. Even though you stop smoking, it's too late once it starts. And we lost him, and it was sad.
I was wondering, I thought it was probably heart-related or COPD, something along those lines.
It was COPD.
So, yeah. It's a shame. Irene? How are you?
Yes, I don't smoke anymore.
Yes, she just quit. A couple. How long has it been now?
It's February.
February now.
I quit in February, yeah, and I'm quite proud of myself because I was a 50-odd year smoker.
Now you need to quit. Anyone who's listening to this, if you smoke, quit. It's poison.
That's right. It definitely is.
But I talked a little bit about Art. What he did that was important was that when Art started the Coast to Coast, the Paranormal show, and From Politics to the Paranormal, in the world, there was only curated media. In other words, the internet didn't exist, or it did, but it was very small factor. And the result of this was that if you came on like I did, I had to go out in the 1980s with my book Communion about a close encounter of the third kind. And it was an absolute nightmare because no one was interested in the questions that the experience had raised in my mind. They only wanted to hear stories about he thinks he was abducted by aliens, hardy har har. And that's all they cared about. Then suddenly Art Bell comes along with a different idea. His idea is, let's let these people with all of these wild claims of every kind, just talk. We're not going to say we believe them or disbelieve them.
Yeah.
We're just going to let them talk and let the listener evaluate that and explore that. And all of a sudden, there was this radio show that I could go on, and along with many others, and really tell my story with a host who did not necessarily believe or disbelieve me. In all the years I knew Art Bell, which is pushing 25 years now, I guess, I never knew what he thought about my close encounter experiences. He never said, and I never asked. And I don't know what he thought about anything. He kept that to himself. That was the whole point. And yet his show was constantly being criticized as if he would have somebody on, then the media would start yelling, oh, Art Bell believes this, Art Bell believes that. And it became absolutely absurd when Art Bell didn't believe any of it. Art Bell was just saying, let's listen. Let's see what they have to say. Maybe there's something in it, and maybe not. And that was the beginning of the revolution that you are now part of.
Well,
that's true, and that's how we mold our radio show, and many other people do. We put the news out there, we put the word out there, we let our guests express themselves, and then we leave it up to the listeners to decide for themselves. We don't try to persuade anyone.
A lot of shows try to go the opposite route. They try to do the gotcha route, and they'll embarrass guests. And, and sometimes we can get even criticized for what they say, oh, you're playing it soft with your guests. It's like, no, because we'll ask questions. I even have questions ready for you tonight that are going to be said with respect, but they'll be harder questions. And, because we respect our guests, we want people to enjoy the show and come back, and we want to have a sharing of ideas. That's more what this show is about, is a sharing of ideas, and whether people want to believe it or not, that's up to them. This is just ideas to make people think and use their brains and not be spoon-fed by the regular media or everything else that's out there. Just the world is so much more wonderfully strange than we realize or that we're taught. And, it's great to have that open mind to be able to at least consider possibilities of what we're really dealing with in this so-called reality. We owe so much to art for paving the way for all of us. And now internet...
They molded us, didn't they? In a way, he's molded all of us.
Well, now internet
really did.
Anyway. Yeah.
Radio shows like ours, we are a dime a dozen nowadays. We understand that. That's why, all we can do is do our best, and we try to have more of a conversational style with our guests so that we can talk about these things, and hopefully people feel like they're part of the conversation and are involved, invested in it. So, again, Art, you blaze the trail for all of the rest of us, and we want to thank you, and Godspeed.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And again, this another segue directly into your book, Whitley, because that's what we are talking about tonight, is your new book, The Afterlife Revolution. And you co-authored this book with your wife, who had passed away. And
that's correct.
Yeah, I've followed you and Anne for many years through Unknown Country, and I've read many of your books, and so I've always felt like I've got to know you both a little bit, as much as I could through those mediums. And I was really sad when I heard she had that last stroke, and then when she passed away. So, and then when things started to happen after that, I've been following that as well up until the new book. Could you just lead in for just our listeners a little bit about how that took place, your relationship, and then how that moved forward after her passing?
Yeah, and later we're going to need to backtrack to an earlier time as to why Anne was so well prepared to do this, which is itself an incredibly fascinating story, in my opinion. But here's what had happened. Annie had a brain tumor, and it was brought to a complete halt despite without the doctors were very worried because it was an extremely dangerous tumor, but they succeeded brilliantly and unexpectedly in bringing it to a halt, with the result that Anne had an experience that no one expected. She lived for 2 years when it was expected initially that she would only live a few months. And as a result of this, something occurred that doesn't really happen very often, because most people with tumors this big don't last that long, which is that her brain the capillaries in the brain, because of the weight of the remaining tumor, began to burst, and she started to have a series of strokes. Anne was an expert on the afterlife. She was a modern shaman, without any paraphernalia of any kind, and in fact, a disinterest in that sort of thing, because she had a near-death experience in 2004. So when she said to me, as after the most recent, she had a stroke in late July, and the doctors had been very frank with us. They said that they will go on until one of them kills her, meaning that she could end up in a state of locked in or any kind of state. It would just be random. And she said, after this most recent stroke, she said, "Whitley, it's time. I'm ready to go." And she died a conscious death. She was not afraid. She died at the time, there was no assisted suicide law in California, but we were very, very careful to obey the law in every respect. And we called hospice in, and they were experts at helping people like this. What she did was she stopped eating and drinking and was given morphine and various things to keep her mouth from being too dry. And she was very weak. And normally it's an agonizing thing to do. It's not agonizing for the patient if it's done right, but for the loved ones, it can be very hard. It can take as long as 2 weeks, but in Annie's case, she was so weak, it took only about 4 or 5 days, and she passed. Of course, to me, who loved her just deeply and dearly, we both did. We were very much in love. It was hard. It was hard for her too in that respect. But she was a very courageous person. And as I say, death did not frighten Anne at all. She knew more about death, I think, and dying and the afterlife than anyone I've ever known. Because in addition to being cognizant of all of this stuff, she was a brilliant scholar and a really, really smart person. So she was well equipped to have a conscious death and a successful one, and that's what happened. She died very gently about 10 hours after she lost consciousness.
She died with dignity, didn't she?
With what?
Dignity.
Absolutely. It was an extremely dignified passing. And the thing that happened was, to me, was this. Of course, the moment she died, I was sitting having dinner with my daughter and son, daughter-in-law and son, and I suddenly heard Anne's voice say, "Whitty, I'm dying right now." And I rushed into the bedroom, lay down beside her, put my hand on her heart. It beat about 10 more times and stopped. Just as easily and gently as that. Mm. And that was the second thing that had happened. Earlier, one of the hospice workers had heard her say, "I want to die in red pajamas," early that day. And this woman leaped up all of a sudden and said, "Mr. Strieber, I've got to go out and get Mrs. Strieber a pair of red pajamas. I just heard her clear as a bell say in my head, I want to die in a pair of red pajamas." And And she didn't probably care one way or another about the color of the pajamas. What was happening was, now that Annie could no longer speak and was not conscious, her soul was coming free, and she was experimenting with what worked. So we got her into the red pajamas that day, and I had a feeling something like that was going on, that it was an experiment in communication more than it was a real request for red pajamas.
Yeah.
In any case, what happened next was she had been taken away. It was about 9:30 that night, and I was just devastated. I was sitting in a chair, just silent. I could not imagine life without Anne. It was, we were just extremely close in every way, physically, mentally, spiritually, every way you could imagine, emotionally, certainly. And I was saying in my mind, honey, are you anywhere anymore? Do you still exist? And the phone rang. And it was a friend of ours. No one knew at this point that Anne had died. It wasn't out yet at all. And she said, Whitley, I just heard Anne's voice in my head say, call Whitley. Is she all right? And I said, Belle, she's not all right. She died an hour and a half ago. This is all in the book, in the Afterlife Revolution. And I thought, my God, it's almost like Annie is communicating with me through Belle. But I still didn't kind of get it, because I'm supposed to be a big believer in all this nonsense about, it's not nonsense. There's a lot of nonsense out there about UFOs, and I don't believe it. I really keep it all in question. Let me put it that way. We don't go down that path right now. Anyway, so, I was perplexed and kind of awed, really, by Belle's call, because it was almost as if Anne was out there influencing her. It really seemed like that. But then it kept happening. Over the next 5 or 6 days, there were 6 more people who had that same experience. And at some point, I remembered a conversation the two of us had back in the 90s, when we were becoming aware of just how profoundly the whole experience of dying and of recontacting the dead and the whole close encounter experience, as it's popularly known, were connected. Annie, we had sat down and we said to each other, we're beginning to believe there is an afterlife, because we were not really believers at the time. And we said to each other, if there is one, and then the first one of us to die will try to contact the other one. And then I said, well, I'm never going to believe it. And she said, well, why don't we do it this way? We'll do it through friends. We'll contact friends and tell the friend to call or to talk to you and to the one that's still alive. And that way it'll be a signal, because we told no one about this, not our son, not any friends, nobody. And I realized this. I thought, my God, she's carrying out that plan. She's doing it. And then
she's proving her existence still.
Exactly. She did it so skillfully. She really did a good job of it. And Dr. Gary Schwartz, who's one of the leading investigators of the afterlife, stories in the United States, said to me after he read the manuscript, he said, Whitley, I want to write a foreword to this, because this is one of the best cases of afterlife communication I've ever read in my career. And so he wrote a foreword to the book, and it just went on, and it goes on to this day. To this day, the last time something extraordinary happened involving Anne was yesterday.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, it is a new kind of life for me. I live with a wife who is very much here, but she doesn't happen to have a physical body anymore. So I've decided, and as I'm sitting here, I'm looking down at my hand, at my left hand,
Yeah.
My ring is on the third finger and her ring is on the fourth, because now as I see it, it's two people still, but we're sharing one body.
Yeah.
We have the one body left right now.
Well, I think it's absolutely amazing. Your book, I started to read it. I've got a couple. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm a couple of
chapters. Go ahead. I'll talk all afternoon if you let me. Or evening, rather. I'm sorry. It's evening there.
Yeah, I'm a couple of chapters from the end, so don't tell me how the end worked. Please do not ruin the ending for me. But I'm a couple of chapters from the end. And I only wish, really, that I'd read this book back last year. I really do, because my mother also suffered from a stroke, but she was trapped in a dead body. She couldn't talk. She couldn't move. She could move her eyes.
What Anne wanted to avoid, and I'm so sorry to hear that for you, because that's as hard a thing as can happen to somebody.
But when I started listening to the audio book, and one thing or another, it started making me think more about my mum, maybe what my mum suffered, because my mother was over 300 miles away from me. I used to have to keep making the trip to London to see her, and she was in continued care nursing home at the end, and there was nothing. They couldn't do anything for her, but she survived in that dead body for 8 months. 8 months she lay like that.
Yeah, I remember all that.
Oh.
That was tough.
Yeah.
That's hard, very hard.
It was hard, very hard.
Well,
but
to be frank, Annie,
I've got to tell you this, one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
I was listening to music the other day, and I like Josh Groban, and one of his songs came on that I'd never heard before, and straight away my mind went straight to you and to Anne, and the words to this song were absolutely beautiful. It was like she was telling him how much she missed him since she passed, sort of thing. But it's absolutely brilliant, the song.
Do you remember which song it was?
I will look for it. I've got it saved somewhere on a computer because I wanted to download it onto my MP player. So I'll get it out. But it's absolutely beautiful. One hell of a beautiful song, and the words just fitted everything that was in that book.
You know.
Well, it's interesting. That's lovely. If you find the song, read some of the words. I'd love to hear them. I'll send them. I'll send the song to Mark, and I'll also I'll find the lyrics to the song and send them to Mark as well, and he can send them over to you. Okay. Well, I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that the last thing that happened, remarkable thing that happened involving Anne, happened yesterday afternoon, and I think the listeners might want to know what it was, so I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a friend's house, and we were another friend was planning to come and hadn't been able to make it at the last minute, and so I left, and then the wife called the other friend and got her message machine and left a message saying Whitley was here and we missed you. That's not what the message says. When the woman who missed the get together listened, our mutual friend's voice is saying, Whitley and Anne were here and we missed you. And she and her husband was standing right there when she left the message, and they're both adamant that she did not say Anne. I mean, why would she? Because Anne's not with us anymore. And I said, Anne is apparently not with us. And Anne she has a wonderful sense of fun and humor, and she is well, you read the book, and she said and says to this day so many extraordinary things from the other side, like things like we are light alive, and the thing about enlightenment, that enlightenment is what happens when there is nothing left of us but love. And that was almost all there ever was of Annie. She was full of love. She wasn't at all sentimental, though, so you didn't necessarily realize it at first. But unless you really crossed Anne, she was always on your side. She did not apply her judgment or beliefs to anybody. She was simply there. And it was a remarkable way of being. It was really beautiful. She even managed to live with me, which was an extraordinary achievement in and of itself.
That's what I say about with my wife, too, is how she can handle living with me half the time. I don't know.
Well, you know, men are no good at anything and anything involving marriage. The women are the ones who make it work. And now that I have to cook for myself, all kinds of things happen around here. I know what it's like to cook green beans with no water and discover that quite a while after you start. It's not good.
No.
You don't want to do that.
You know, one of the things I want to mention is, you know, Irene mentioned her mother passing over a year ago, and the three of us actually, because Anne passed, 2 years ago now? How long has it been now?
August of 2015.
Okay. August of 2015.
August the 11th.
Wow. August 5th of 2016, I lost my identical twin brother. He passed suddenly.
Oh, that's always a hard one.
He passed of a heart attack, and it's, for me, I can understand your deep love for Anne and how connected you two were. And, you know, I have an older brother. I've lost family members. My father passed a few years ago, but nothing has affected me like losing my brother Bill, because, you know, when you're an identical twin, you have that connection. I mean, we never had the psychic connections or what people think of, but we were just so incredibly close, even when we were separated. And, you know, he was still living in California where we grew up, and I'm out here in New Jersey. And he had a lifelong struggle with depression, and he was really, you know, trying to get his life together the last few years, and then he was gone. And for me, in all this time, it's been really tough. And I had a breakdown afterwards. After he passed, I was out of it for quite a while, and it took me a while to pick myself back up. But, you know, when I was reading your book, I almost get jealous of that communication that you were able to have with Anne. And I'm sitting there going, you know, I wish I could be able to have more communication with my brother, because I talk to him all the time. You know, I just talk out loud, hope he's hearing. And but occasionally, now you had something happen the other day. I'll tell you something that happened to me. Occasionally, I'll throw out there to ask him, Bill, if you're listening, can you give me a sign? And 2 days ago, I had said that out to him after I finished reading your book. And almost within a few minutes, I got an answer. Because I walked into a store, and there was a song in a grocery store, and they have music playing over the loudspeakers. And they had a song that I had heard the other day, but I had not heard in years, which was the Blues Brothers' Soul Man. And when I heard it the other day, I was commenting to my wife, oh, I love this song. I haven't heard it in a long time. Well, then just a few minutes after asking my brother for a sign, I walk into the store, and there's the song playing again. And that's not where I heard it the last time. I heard it on Sirius before, and I'm going, wait a minute. And I could instantly feel a connection. And you can see it even in the words, the Blues Brothers, Soul Man. It hit me. And I felt like that was a possible connection just minutes after I asked for one.
Well, you know, that's exactly how it works. And so it probably was a connection. That's exactly the sort of thing that happens. How many stories like that have I heard? Dozens and dozens at this point. This is one of the classic ways that this unfolds. But we have to always step back a step and say to ourselves, we don't know for certain ever any of this. But this is what it seems like. Because otherwise we fall into belief. And Annie used to say, where belief starts, thinking stops. And she was such a stickler for the question. Back when I was working on Communion, the book about my close encounter, she would read every page of the manuscript, and she would say, no, Whitley, You're saying that this actually is exactly what happened. This paragraph reads it's too precise. You're debating. You're trying to win a debate here, and that's not what you need to do. This is a question. We have to keep this all in question. And I respected her intelligence and her skills. She was also a highly trained teacher. She'd had an MA from master's degree from one of the best teaching colleges in the United States, the Bank Street College of Education. So she was definitely very skilled. And what I say is that it's so familiar, the experience you just described, both in my life and in the lives of many others that I have had contact with since I wrote the book. My guess is it was him, but we have to keep it in question.
And that's true. I mean, I know people who talk about they've seen their loved ones in dreams. I've had them appear in a couple of dreams, usually just as a participant in my dream. It doesn't feel like anything special. There was one time, though, where it was a few months after he had passed. I was hoping I could connect with him in some way in a dream. And one night I in the middle of the night, I just suddenly had this dream of being in a white room. There was like this almost like subway tile, but almost like a bathroom, but it wasn't a bathroom. It was just all white, this white room. And I happened to turn, and there was my brother standing there looking at me. And I got this big smile on my face. Now, you have to understand my brother and I's relationship. This is how we always were with each other. We loved each other. But I took one look at him, and instead of like running and hugging him and saying, "Oh, I miss you," or anything, my first words in my dream out of my mouth was, "Well, it's about frickin' time you showed up." And I didn't use frickin'.
No.
And then I just know that we had a conversation. Something happened after that. But you know what? Typical of dreams, I can't remember it.
Well, that is very common in this experience because you're dealing with a level of your own mind, the soul level of the mind, that I think a lot of that material is filtered out by the brain. In other words, it doesn't really belong in this level of reality. Like what happened the other night with my friend. She said Whitley and Ann were here, I'm sure, because that's what came out on the phone message on the other end. But neither of them heard that. They filtered it out because that's not what we're supposed to say and know. They just heard what she thought she said, which was Whitley was here. And because on another level, she knew perfectly well that Ann was there too. And that the friend would want to know that because Ann and this other lady were good friends.
What would you credit this intense communication and connection that you have with Ann? So many of us lose loved ones. And even though I've had a few happenings in the past year and a half, they're very few and far between, and I get through a lot of doubt, and that's why I asked out loud the other day if something was there. I did get a synchronicity, and that makes me feel better. But so many people, we lose loved ones, we don't hear anything, we always hope for a sign. And
yes,
and yet in your case with Ann, it seems like there's a really deeper connection than most people. That you're able to receive these bits of information, communication from her?
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. Most of them have to do with Ann herself, some of them with me. But one of them was that what I alluded to earlier was her general expertise in this area. She really understood it. She understood physics even. I mean, she understood the physics of the afterlife, if you can believe that, and probably was right about it. She was right about most things. And she understood the way the universe worked very deeply. She had for example, a knowledge of physics. And as she died, a physics book called Physics from Fisher Information fell open in our library to a page that someone, I believe Anne, had at some point in time underlined, the book hadn't been opened in 10 years at least, and it said in this page that the universe began with a single primordial quest for knowledge. And it related, the fact that the book was there and open related to something that a friend, not a dear friend, but a friend had told us about his own life experience. And he asked me to keep it private, and it's not in his biography, and he's quite famous, so I'll tell you what it was, but I'm not going to tell you who he was. It was that he had been in the hospital with a myocardial infection, and he was a heart surgeon. And he began to struggle, and he started to call the nurses. And that no one came. And suddenly a woman came gliding into his room in a long white gown, leaned over him, and to his amazement and horror, reached inside his chest, and he could feel her cradle his heart in her hands. And then she withdrew and went out the window, glided out the window, and he thought, am I dead? What has just happened here? But then in the next moment, the whole structure of a surgery that has become an absolutely critical surgery in human life came into his mind, and it's the surgery he invented. So she knew that story, and that's why she chose to drop that book open as she passed away, because the second you're out of your body, the second that happens, you are whole again. You know you have a great deal more knowledge than you did when everything was being filtered through the brain. And so she left with that. Now, from there, though, the question becomes, why is the relationship so intense? In part, it's because she's so skillful. She knows what she's doing. And in part, it's because she made a decision to remain turned toward this world. She appears often in the guise of Princess Leia, in the Princess Leia costume from Star Wars, because she's a good rebel. She's signaling that she's a good rebel, that she's not doing this the normal way.
I was going to say it's not the bikini costume, is it?
No, it's the costume that Princess Leia wore when she was when you see her talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi at the beginning of the first Star Wars, and when she's a good rebel, basically. She's trying to make something new happen, and that's what the book is about. She has created this book out of me, really, out of my mind, using my mind and her ability to communicate with me, and she created the book. She did it herself. I think it's one of the few books ever written by a dead person, but that's exactly what it is.
Well, there are many books out there from people who, quote unquote, channel or supposedly channel beings from the other side, whether they're humans or what they call ascended masters. And, while I lean towards some of it, I also take a lot of it with an iceberg-sized grain of salt. And what's happening with you is not channeling per se. How would you describe it?
No, it's not. It's something different. Annie did not care for channeling. She was not a believer. And there's no way to channel her. I've tried. And anyway, I'm too shy I'm too uptight about all of this I can't just channel her, because I'm too afraid that I'm channeling my own mind, some part of my own mind. And the way it works is just very different. When we were working on the book, Annie would say things, and they were very spontaneous. Sometimes it would feel I would impulsively look toward the voice. In other words, it felt like she was right there in the room in those moments, but they generally weren't like long dialogues or anything. They're very brief and very pungent, I would say. They're little short little statements, but the book is structured around them because they came usually at just the right moment.
Yeah, but those short little statements that you're talking about, they're so intense, aren't they?
Oh God, they're wonderful. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, they have given me so much understanding and so much joy because they're wonderful statements, most of them.
Well, they are. And what's different about this book from the books that people channel is the fact that this book radiates this love, this feeling, this emotion.
Yeah, well, we were really in love, and I'll tell you how we met and give you an idea of what this love affair was like. I had moved to New York from London. I had been living in London in 1968.
London, UK?
Yeah, London, UK. I went to the London, it's now called, I believe, the London Film School. Then it was called the London School of Film Technique in Soho. Yeah. And I had a wonderful time there.
You could have met me, you know.
Were you at LSFT?
No, I was dancing in a nightclub in Soho.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I was dancing in a nightclub called the Whiskey A Go-Go in Soho. Round about that time,
I remember Whiskey A Go-Go. Yeah, I got chased down the street by Leho Fook with a meat cleaver one time. You remember him? Yeah. You remember his shop? Oh,
yeah.
I forgot what we did to annoy him, but he jumped out from behind the counter and chased us away. Very dramatic. Yeah. Anyway, I had moved back to New York, and I was lonely and, trying to get girls. And I was a media planner in an advertising agency. And I'm one of these people who's obsessively honest. And I would go to the singles bars and stuff. And, in the singles bars, all the guys were doctors or lawyers or airline pilots or something. But I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say, what I was, which was a media planner, and I'm not very good looking. I'm okay, but nothing special. And that didn't work because they weren't interested in a media planner. They wanted an airline pilot who was actually probably not even a media planner, but something less even than that. But
more likely an airline pilot that was a builder.
Yeah, they wanted the deception and the fun of the deception. Yeah. So that didn't work. So I saw in the local newspaper an advertisement for something called Mind Mates. And I thought, well, I'm something of an intellectual. Maybe I could find a girl who was also interested in literature and stuff like I am. And I sent off for the forms, and I got this enormous envelope filled with these complex forms of essays to write and things. And I thought, my God, this is serious. But I filled all the essays out, and I did everything. 2 weeks later, I got a list of names. And it was a fairly strange list. There were about 5 names on it. 4 of them all had the last names of fish, trout, and stuff like that. And I thought, can this be real? The 5th one was Ann Maddox, and she was the only one without a fish last name. But I was curious, and so I thought, are they all fakes? Is it actually just this one name? So I called one of the fish, and she turned out to be quite real and be called Rebecca Trout or whoever it was. I don't remember. And I had a date with her. It wasn't very successful. And so I thought, well, I'm going to leave the fish aside and I'm going to try this other girl, the one without a fish name. I called her, and we were working in offices just right down the street from each other in Madison Avenue. And so I went to meet her. And I walked into the office, and sitting at reception was this lovely young woman with big brown eyes and other things that were big too, and beautiful legs that she had were crossed. And I walked up and I thought to myself, oh God, if only Ann Maddox looks half as beautiful as this girl. And I said, I'm here to see Ann Maddox. And she said, I'm Ann.
Well, there's nothing fishy about that one, was there?
We were not apart again for more than 2 weeks in the next 45 years.
Wow.
She was amazing. I mean, I was trying to be
to you, she was a dream.
Oh, yeah. God, it was like a dream come true.
Yeah.
Because, I was the kind of guy who, if a girl, any time she found something better, I was gone. And I'd been jilted. I'd been jilted so many times, it was just ridiculous. But Anne was not, she immediately we were on each other's wavelengths. It was like we were born to be together. It was incredible. And we found each other seemingly completely by random.
Yeah.
And it was an absolutely wonderful marriage. I'm not saying it was all.
That's a nice story.
Because we had plenty of fights, but it was a good marriage.
If you didn't have a fight every now and then, you wouldn't be a married couple. That's what
you wouldn't.
I say.
Also, I mean, most married couples realize that. I mean, the ones who really fight seriously would never agree with this. But actually, a good fight is a lot of fun, especially the way we used to make up. It was really fun. And in the middle of the fight, we would usually both realize what was going to happen when we got ourselves calmed down, and that would be when the fight would start to wind down and change into apologies and getting together.
Well, if I have a fight with my husband, we end up just looking at each other, bursting out laughing, and doing stupid things. Like the other day, we pretended we were on skates in the kitchen, doing the bolero, skating around the kitchen. You know, did you ever see?
Sure,
yeah.
Well, see, that's what it is to be married.
That's it.
And,
that's it.
You know, we had a great time, and that marriage, that love affair, it just simply didn't want to end, and it didn't. It has not ended. It's very alive. And I still miss her body. She had such a lovely, lovely body. Even when she was ill, nothing ever changed for me.
Did she have long legs?
No, she was short. She was
short.
About 5'7", I think.
I think I would have liked to have met her. I really would have liked to have met her.
She was kind of rounded off. She was really very cute.
5'7" is tall.
Well,
I could be wrong. 5'7"?
I'm 6'1". Maybe she was 5'5". I really could be wrong.
I'm 5'5". You know, 5'7" is quite tall to me.
Well, she was about 6 inches shorter than me, and I'm 6'1".
By the way, Whitley, I've just found that, and I put it in there for you in messaging.
The song, yes, Josh Groban.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm looking at the last 3 lines on that song. You posted the lyrics, and I can.
Just me, and you know. I like it when he sings opera, you see, but he's not singing opera. This is not an operatic song.
No, it's called To Where You Are. Let me say the last 3 lines here. It goes, I know you're there, a breath away's not far to where you are.
That's right.
That's right. They're
true.
Right here. And he's always saying that. She says, I'm here. I'm right here.
Yeah.
And she also said...
Maybe it was another thing that she met. She more than likely knew you were coming on the show.
Oh, of course she did. She's right here, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm just too shy about channeling. I can't... In fact, right now, she says, let me talk. And I'm not sure I can manage that.
Well, I put it out there before the show to Ann. I said, like, Ann, if you want to show up on the show, you're more than welcome. I threw up for my brother and anyone else who wants to come in and chime in. Because we've had some things when we've done interviews before. We've had strange noises, strange things happening on the show. So if that's how they want to communicate, or if that's how they want to let us know that they're here, be my guest. It'd be great to hear from you.
I'm sure there is some sort of message or something in that song that will make you feel the way I felt the other day.
Well, I'm trying to listen for her, and if I hear her, I'll certainly say what she says. One thing she said that's germane to this early on, she said, it looks like you're all intentionally ignoring us.
Oh.
Which was really interesting. Like we're sort of turned away from them and we're ignoring them on purpose. I know that right at first, when she talked and people didn't listen, she got mad. That happened to some friends of ours in Florida, which were like, I think it's the second or third couple that she contacted before I had even realized what was going on. And the lady was writing a blog about her. And Anne was apparently right there and being ignored even while she was being written about. And so suddenly there was this huge explosion in the house that terrified their animals, and they thought that something had exploded in the house, or a transformer had exploded outside in the yard or something. But there was nothing. It was all quiet. Nothing had exploded. And so the lady writes me and says, Whitley, I think it was Anne. And I thought, oh my goodness, is she angry about being dead? Because the woman was, at that moment when it happened, was writing about how Anne had had such a peaceful passing. And I thought, maybe it's Anne saying, I didn't have a peaceful passing. I had a very hard time. But it wasn't that. It was Anne saying, will you please acknowledge my presence? You're driving me nuts. I'm pretty sure that was it. Because she's seen, they've had Anne in their life really basically ever since. Most of us who get contacted with her, by her, she stays with us. She doesn't go any, she stays with all my friends our friends who she's contacted, and relatives too. I mean, a lot of us, I know 25 or 30 people in my friends and relatives group who are in contact with Anne, and among my listeners on my radio show, which is called Dreamland, by the way, it's on unknowncountry.com, and people who go to the site, there's at least another couple of hundred who have had experiences with her. So,
well, if it's any consolation right now, my scalp is tingling like crazy. And just a minute ago, it felt like there's a presence here with me. So,
well, if you hear from Anne, say something, because I'm not hearing from her. I probably am, but I'm scared to say it because I just don't feel comfortable channeling. I'm not, she was always against it, and I feel like I would be channeling. It's not like when I'm sitting quietly and her voice comes in so spontaneously. I can't do that in this circumstance while I'm having a discussion.
This is kind of new for me. I don't do this often.
I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, I think, as Lyndon Johnson used to say of Gerald Ford.
Yeah. I'm just feeling it pretty strong right now. So somebody is at least here. So Anne, if you're here, hello, welcome to the show. Fantastic. I'm just quivering right now. Anyway.
Well, it's very typical of Annie that she would come not to me, but to you while we were on the show together. That is classic Anne. And she would, if she's doing it, she would be doing it so that whatever communication she gets up to will come through you and not through me, and therefore be more acceptable to your listeners. And I will tell you immediately, I'll know for sure, I would think, if she says anything substantive about her life or anything like that through you, that I'll tell you right away if it's real or not.
Okay, I'm not a channeler I just sometimes get feelings and impressions, and I'm feeling something right now. So we'll see how things go from here.
See what happens.
Yeah. That's all we can do. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you about with Anne, and something that's always kind of bothered me, and I've always been looking at, I've been a paranormal investigator for many years. I've always been fascinated with the idea of the afterlife, or, what happens next. And over the years, I guess I don't want to even call it, it's not a belief, it's way of thinking has changed dramatically. And Irene and I, we work very closely together, and we have a lot of different theories on things happening, the nature of reality, what is the quote unquote afterlife, spirits, and what happens after we die. And, reading your book, you touched on many things with Anne that kind of struck home to me. This last year after my brother passed, I did a lot of thinking about, well, is my brother really still here? Is it him? Or, because I always felt like if you accept, or I lean towards the idea of reincarnation. I lean towards the fact that we live multiple lifetimes, learning lessons and whatnot. It's part of the soul's journey. I've had some past life memories pop up, so I lean towards that. I'm not saying I believe in it, I just say I lean towards it. And yet I feel like our spirit is so much more than what we are here. And so when you cross over and you have access to that totality of who you are, does that person fade away? Does that person exist anymore, who they were in this lifetime? Now, in your book, there was this one line, it just struck me so hard, where when you asked Anne, you know, if she is Anne, I forget exactly how you asked her, but she goes, I'm not Anne anymore, but I'll be Anne for you.
But I'll always be Anne for you. Yes. And that has been a real touchstone for my exploration of what is going on here. Because now this being is not Anne. This being is all of the lives that he, she, it has no sex anymore, has ever lived and has experienced. I think that we physical creatures are projections into the time stream, and this is done to gain experience. And I think that the quality of the experience, I'm not sure whether it's the quality of experience or the intensity of experience is more important. Now I do hear Anne. She says I think she said it's the intensity. But if the quality isn't good, now I don't hear her anymore. But so anyway, we're here to gain experience by being in the time stream in such a way that we do not see the future, we do not know the past, not really, we just have the fragmentary and faulty memories of the brain, and behind that, the strange and deceptive narrative that we call history. And we're here to have spontaneous experiences. We're here to be continuously surprised by the next moment. And that is where the energy comes from. And when we're born, I think a child looks out like an animal does, with absolutely no judgment. And then the child is given a name and learns his name. And the ego begins to build around that. And there's nothing wrong with this. People say, oh, ego is bad. It's not. Absolutely not. It's wonderful. It's what the brain does. It constructs this personality so that you can live in the world and have these experiences. And the result of this is that you build a personality and you become to feel like this is you. I am Whitley. This is all I am, and there's nobody else here. But that's not actually true, because when the body dies, so does that. That dies. But there's something else that has been there all along that does not die. And that is what Anne is now, and your brother is now. One of the things that I saw that recently that was just absolutely amazing to me was this very large, like, sheet with all of these portraits, black and white portraits on it. And at the very top, there was a picture of Anne, one of the pictures of Anne I have here in the house. And the others were men and women going way back in time. And I thought, my goodness, I saw this, I believe, during meditation. And I thought, this looks like Anne is showing me all of her lives that she's lived, or it has lived, because I cannot see how anyone in that state could have a sexual nature, because, I mean, she's obviously been men and women over time. And I think we all have. I have past life memories, too, that came into my mind very spontaneously.
I have, too, yes. In fact, of one that we've discussed in the past where I did a past life regression and found that I was a woman in Boston in the late 1800s. In fact, I was able to find this person because a name popped in my head. And not only did I find her, I found the family, and they were authors, and it was one of the daughters of oh God, good Lord, what was her name? Do you remember? She wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I know she
it turned
existed.
out
And
I was his sister.
Yeah, and in
my
further
grandson.
reflection, we found out that Irene was my sister in that time period.
Fascinating. Well, you know, there are a number of incredible books about afterlife. About past lives and reincarnation. And what's another thing that Annie said recently, it's not in the book, that's just fascinated me. She says, now you're finally starting to talk. What she said recently was that all souls are evolving, that souls are much bigger and more complex now than they were 1,000 years ago, that this whole process is about building these oversouls or whatever they are that I just was discussing and making them more and more rich. It's a process of enrichment, like a school, and each life you live is another kind of diploma. But anyway, the thing here is that oh shoot, I've lost my train of thought. Darn it. What was I saying? Where did I start?
Oh.
It's such a good thought too, and I
We're talking about past lives and where we.
Oh yes, past lives. Anyway, there are books now, because of the fact I think that we are becoming much richer and bigger souls, like Annie said. There are books appearing that are incredible about past life memories. One of them is called Hunting for Carol Beckwith, and it was written by the then chief of detectives of the Indianapolis Police Department, and he went to a party with a police party, a cop party, and one of the young cops there, one of the lady cops there, was a past life. She did past life regressions. This, sort of a party trick. And of course, he was the chief, and everybody demanded that he do a past life regression, which he eventually conceded he was trapped, and he's, obviously would do it. And so he did it. And he had a stunning experience, completely unexpected, of literally living the life of this artist. And he was in an art studio. He saw all these paintings this man had painted. He could even identify things like the brand or the label on a bottle of wine that the man was drinking. And being a detective, he looked around in this studio very carefully, and then came out of the past life regression and described the paintings that he'd seen. They weren't familiar to anybody. It was a 19th century painter of some kind. And so when he went home, he made copious notes, because this had been a very striking experience and very unexpected for him. And it lay there for a couple of years. Couldn't find any paintings. He looked on the internet and stuff that resembled the paintings he had remembered. And so they kind of forgot about it. They walked into an art gallery in New Orleans a few years later, and there were the paintings all in the gallery. And he was flabbergasted. And he said, "Where did you get these?" And the gallery owner said, "Well, these paintings are from an estate sale that just occurred a few weeks ago. And these paintings have never been exposed to the public before. They've always been in this estate. And this is their first public appearance, including one of a lady dwarf, a female dwarf. It's a formal portrait, and rather unusual because it was of a female dwarf, and he had that in his notes too. So he looked up this artist. The artist was named Carol Beckwith, and he did a little bit more research, detective work, and found that the artist's diaries were kept at the Chicago Institute of Art. So he went there and compared all of the notes that he had taken from the past life regression to details of the artist's life. And in the book, all of these different little details match up. It's extraordinary. And either he went into a past life that was not his own, or he went into a past life that was his own. But he certainly went into a past life during that hypnosis. He certainly did. He went into Carol Beckwith's life.
That's fantastic. Very interesting.
It's not the only one. There's lots of them.
Well, the other thing, if we want to expand minds even farther, is you have talked about in your past books where you have seen multiple parallel lives of seeing yourself.
Oh, yeah. I had that happen here, right here in this apartment.
Yes.
I found myself living in five different parallel lives at the same time, which was really a shocker. I have these close encounters all the time. The most recent one was 2 nights ago, and they're very much a part of my life now. They're not like what you read in the UFO books at all. They're much more personal and much different. In any case, on that particular night, I found myself literally living in 5 lives at the same time. And that was very incredible. It was like they were all happening in the present. One was this life, and the other 4 were other lives. As I recall, it was 5. And so that seems to be something that could be happening too. If this universe is really infinite, in the sense of the many worlds theory being true, and that there is an infinity of parallel universes, then there is essentially no end to us either. We don't have an end. We don't have an end in the present, the past, or the future.
See, what I like to joke with Irene, because there have been instances, we've mentioned this before on our show, where she has, she will zone out and doing what she does, and sometimes she says she's dealt with different versions of me. You there, Irene? Irene?
She's not.
Sorry, yeah, I was here. I was muted. Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, sadly, sometimes I do deal with different versions of Mark.
Interesting. I would like to know something about that.
Well,
what are these versions like?
Well, one smoked. Actually, I found a version of Mark that smoked.
And I don't smoke.
Cigarettes.
I've never smoked in my life. Not cigarettes. And, but, I've never smoked. So, and I find it rather disgusting myself. So, and she finds...
Me too. I don't like it either.
And she finds
when I was younger, I was seen all over the place, even though I was nowhere near the areas that I was seen. I was spotted by people all over the place.
Well, and that sounded more like by location than...
Well, that was, yeah. But I'm saying there are so many strange things in this world.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there are many strange things.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well,
every day something strange is happening. It's like.
Well, Irene lives on a haunted house. She has 3 spirits in her house.
Yeah, but it's not them.
Yeah.
It's not the house. Well, it can be the house sometimes. I kind of, what would you call it? Like, dimension hop sort of thing every now and then. Something like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and that fits in a lot with some theories that we've had the last couple of years. We've been leaning, where I mentioned earlier, my theories on paranormal activity have changed so dramatically. And we look at this idea of multiple realities, multiple dimensions, sometimes overlapping. Now, Willie, you may not remember this. I did interview a couple of years ago with you and Jeffrey Cripple. We're on our old show, Unknown Origins, talking about your book, The Supernatural. No, was it the supernatural? Yeah, the supernatural.
Yeah, the supernatural, 2 words. We split it.
Yes.
Made the cut.
It's very similar to that in that there's so much that's going around us that we turn a blind eye to. The reality is so much stranger than we want to admit. And yet we are all conditioned, it seems, since childhood to stick our heads in the sand and believe, nope, that didn't happen. It's only your imagination. Hearing, your parents tell you that didn't really happen. Quit making things up. And so we just get into this. We're trained to only see the world in one way, and
we filter it out. Like what happened the other day yesterday when my friend said Whitley and Ann were here. She and her husband only heard her say Whitley was here, but it's recorded on the other woman's message machine. She definitely did say Whitley and Ann are here. That's just not what they heard. They filtered their own words out. Mm-hmm. Because we're not supposed to recognize the presence of the dead. But you talk a moment ago about bilocation and ultra high strangeness. Here's a story of bilocation and ultra high strangeness that you don't know, but now you do, or will in a minute. Mm-hmm. Mary Jesus of Agreda was a Carmelite nun in the 17th century who very famously appeared in New Spain, it was then New Spain, to the Jumano Indians in central New Mexico and West Texas, and converted them to Christianity before the conquistadors arrived. And though I think she was Order of the Immaculate Conception, not a Carmelite. But in any case, they arrived, and to find these Indians were already Christian, and they were talking about this woman, and the descriptions were careful and accurate enough to where the nun could be contacted. The church came to the nun in Spain and asked her what had happened, and she told them. Now, fast forward to the present, and while I cannot say precisely where the site is, one of these apparitions that the Indians still know about happened on a site where there was a UFO crash about 40 years ago, from which we are still harvesting materials. Some of these materials have been analyzed by Dr. Jacques Vallée, a very famous UFO researcher.
I'm familiar with Dr. Vallée, yes.
Yeah, funded, I believe, by Robert Bigelow, because it was a very expensive process of analyzing the isotopic ratios in these materials. If the materials are of Earth, they should have one set of isotopic ratios. In fact, the way the isotopic ratios fall out is there's a certain limit in the universe as we understand it, that they can't be outside of these parameters. These materials not only do not have isotopic ratios that are earthly, they couldn't be anywhere in this universe. They are not isotopes that could emerge in this universe as we understand it. They are, in other words, materials of completely unknown origin, and manufacturing artificial materials with artificial isotopic ratios is not impossible theoretically, but the amount of energy it would take would be fantastic, much, much more than we possess here on Earth. And yet they're there. And then behind this is this bilocation event 500 years ago. Now, in my opinion, I have just described to you what could be qualified as ultra-high strangeness.
In a case like that, it makes you wonder, is the actual process of this type of bilocation, is it the person able to project a version of themselves to a different location, time and place that somebody interacts with them? Or could we possibly be dealing with these multiple parallel realities where the veils between them kind of like merge, and you're dealing with, you know, that version, the other version of you coming into a location temporarily? Well,
you know, the nun knew it had happened, but she did not ever say that she had done it. And the lady, she was known as the Lady in Blue, or the Blue Nun. And you know, I have out-of-body experiences, not often, but sometimes. And in a number of cases, they've been observed. I've been observed by other people while I was in the out-of-body state. And I can't control it. In other words, I know about out-of-body travel. I've been to a place in the United States called the Monroe Institute where they teach it. And I knew Robert Monroe, who was the premier out-of-body researcher that we experiencer also that we've ever known. But I can't induce it myself. However, it can be done to me. And a year ago, last April, I was at a conference of scientists, basically, and some academics, but mostly scientists and social scientists, anthropologists and social scientists, not the hard sciences. I think there was one physicist there. In fact, there was, because he was actually a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And in any case, I was there, and I'm there because this is the conference where people with unusual experiences will describe their experiences to the scientists and academics. And it's not a skeptical group. They're there to listen. And I've done these conferences a number of times. So I am in bed at night, one night, in a dormitory situation where it's a conference center, and there are these dormitories, and I'm in one of the dormitories. And I meditate at 11 o'clock at night and at 3 o'clock in the morning, and have been doing this for a long time. And I do the meditation, and I was pretty tired because I'd flown in that day, and we'd had the day before, and we had a long day of conferencing. And suddenly at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm waked up by a blast of energy going down my spine. And I think, oh my God, because I'm often waked up at 3 o'clock in the morning in one way or another if I don't do the meditation. This whole business is all very physical for me. We don't have enough time to talk about it all, but suffice to say, it's not all that mysterious. It's very present. So I think, oh God, I'd already did the 3 o'clock meditation. What's going on here? I get up, drag myself out of bed, and it was really hard, drop down in the chair and try to start it again. I can't start it again. It's a very specialized type of meditation called a sensing exercise. I can't do it. I'm just too tired. So I go back to bed and I lie down, and no sooner do I lie down than I find myself out in the hall. And I think, holy moly, how did I do this? The door, I pulled the door closed, which would mean that it was still locked. And I was now out in the hall at 4 o'clock in the morning with my dorm locked. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get back in? And then I thought, wait a minute. I'm not walking. I'm floating. I'm out of my body. And so I thought, great. My co-author, Jeff Kripal, was heading the conference of Supernatural. And I decided that I'll go wake him up, because he never has seen anything. And I'm quite good at getting people into this special witness program, I call it. And so I tried to wake him up and failed. So I went to the next dorm room, and by this time, because I know I'm out of my body, I've been this way for long, done this many times. I go through the wall into the next dorm room. It's a woman, one of the scientists, and I thought, no, I've done this before. I do not want to wake a woman up. It doesn't go well. I've already had that. I've had that experience.
So get slapped with a restraining order.
Right. And anyway, it's hard to wake people up. You can't do anything, and I'm sure the dead have the same experience. So I go into the next room, and the guy who is, interestingly enough, working on. He does material science research on a classified basis. He's actually working on the site that I just talked about, but that I don't. At the time, we didn't know of any connections. That was where his main. He does materials recovery there, and had provided Dr. Vallée with the materials that he had researched. But I did not know any of that at the time. So, but he's sort of half awake. I can see his eyes are open, and he's obviously sort of in a kind of half awake state. So I know how, using this thing I call the sensing exercise, to make myself more visible. I can do it when I'm out of the body. That's how I enable people to see me. And I do this, and he immediately sits up in the bed because he sees me. And we have a conversation. He remembers it as 20 minutes. I remember it as just a few minutes, where basically we talked about things that were important to him, that I'm not going to repeat, even though I'm not saying his name, because they were very personal. But suffice to say, they have to do with the central issue of the health and life of the soul.
Right.
So then I find myself shooting out of the room, through the top of the dorm and the next thing I know, I'm looking down, and I'm so high that I can see the dawn line off in the middle of the continent somewhere, or not quite that, but 3/4 of the way across the continent. And I'm really way up there, and it's farther. I don't ever go that far, so I was really quite startled. Then I found myself shooting at breakneck speed down to what turned out to be a college campus. And it's Sunday morning, about 7:15, I would guess, because the sun is just coming up, and it was about 4 o'clock when this started. And so in California, and now I'm obviously on the East Coast somewhere. Because the sun is just coming up. So I'm, probably 2 or 3 hours ahead. And a boy comes out of a room. I mean, out of a door. It's obviously a door to a dormitory. I try to make him see me, but I can't. He does not see me. He walks right past me, or through me, actually. So then I go into the dormitory, and I go into the sitting room at the front, and then I go down a hallway, and I look into one of the rooms at the end of the hall. I see a tall object beside the door, leaning up against the wall on the outside in the hall. I go into the room, and there's a boy there sleeping. I can't get him up either. And so then I think to myself, I'm pretty far from my body. And I've had experiences before where getting back in was not easy. And I think, I don't want to die a mysterious death. When I die, I want everybody to know about it. I'm hoping that I will have the grace of a conscious death. I certainly don't want to just be found dead in some dormitory in Petaluma, California for no apparent reason. So I try to go back, and I, again, shoot up into the air. And the next thing I know, I am back. Now, what is going to happen, I wonder? The guy, he saw me. Does he remember or not? We will see. So I go into breakfast, and it's in an uproar. He's telling everybody, he's been texting people since it happened, waking them up, in fact, saying, Whitley came into my room in the out-of-body state. We had a conversation, then he went out through the ceiling. And I realize what this is about. It's about this other level of reality, letting this group of scientists in on a secret, which is the world is much bigger than they thought. And open your eyes, folks. It's big and wonderful and full of incredible stuff like this. Now it goes on. Everybody, of course, wants me to describe every detail. And as I'm describing all of this, two of the conferees say, that's our campus. You're describing our campus. They even knew the dormitory, by the way I described the exterior of it. So the next year, the next April, this is now 2 Aprils ago, and this is the next April, I guess, this last April, I had the remarkable, now it's nearly, no, it's actually about a year ago now. So it's a year ago this month is when I went to the campus physically and had the remarkable experience of entering a place in the physical that I had never seen before, except in the out-of-body experience, with witnesses who could corroborate this.
Now that is phenomenal. And yet...
It's really great. Isn't it fabulous?
It's fabulous.
It's so fun.
But
it's just, we have to have fun with this. That's Annie's mantra is have fun with it.
And yet our mainstream scientists, our mainstream science in general, will never, or at least nowadays, they just refuse to acknowledge the existence of the soul because they're afraid it'll open up such a big can of worms. And if they,
you know what they're afraid of? They're afraid of the fact that we will go back to another 1,000-year religious dictatorship.
Yeah.
Annie, okay, she says now, and I hear her clearly, she says, listen to me. You can enjoy your soul without any of the religious trappings. Now that she did just say.
Oh, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There's a difference between religion and spirituality. And,
enormous difference.
Because spirituality is a personal journey. That's yours and yours alone. Nobody else can do it for you. Where religion dictates to the masses with lots of rituals and rules and whatnot. And there is no wrong way. There is people, they follow their spiritual path, and everybody's is different. I'm curious. One question popped in my head when you were having an out-of-body experience, and I don't know how many you may have had since Anne passed, but have you ever run into her during one of those?
I have tried. Believe me, but the thing is, I can't get out on my own. I never can. I've tried and tried and tried. I've been out, and she's been here. She's often very close to me. And when I've gone out, I've had the feeling sometimes that she was close by, but I've had only one experience, I think. I keep a dream book, but I'd have to go back and look through it to be sure that I'm right about this. I think I've had one experience where I did see her face to face in the form of Anne. And I remember her eyes were really startling. They were very beautiful in this life. They were the most open eyes you could ever imagine. They just, when you looked at Anne's eyes, you were seeing into an open being, and it was clear when you saw it. It was amazing. She had extraordinary eyes, and they were even more open than that. They were shocking. They weren't like our eyes. They were eyes that saw a whole lot more than this, but not dark stuff. They were eyes that saw things in the light of her, which is joy. She said the most important things the visitors ever said to me were 2 words: have joy. That was her mantra, have joy. And it still is, because it's joy that frees us. Joy frees us. Anger, hatred, fear, all of those things keep us bound. Those are chains that bind us. Joy is freedom.
As Yoda would say, the dark side they are. You mentioned the visitors, and that brings me to a point that I wanted to talk to you about. I remember reading very early on in your earlier books, with Communion and Transformation and Breakthrough, that you learned very early on that the visitors somehow seemed to be involved, is I guess the right word or a good enough word, in the soul, in the human soul, in what...
Oh, very involved. It's heavily involved. It's all about souls. This is what it's about. It's not about our bodies. I mean, our bodies are a factor in this because of the fact that what is on offer here is knowledge about how to build strong souls. And, Annie figured this out a long time ago. After I published Communion, we thought at the time that, probably 50 or 100 people had these close encounter experiences. It seemed like a very rare thing because nobody ever spoke of it. And we'd met a researcher, Bud Hopkins, who thought it was about that number, probably not many more than that. And we published the book, and not 2 weeks later, letters started to pour in, until the point that the post office was bringing them in huge bags to the house day after day. And Annie jumped to this. She said, this is important. Whether this is folklore or these are actual encounter experiences, it's important. And she began reading the letters. And I mean, it was just heaps of them. I couldn't even think of how to read them all. And she read the letters and one after another very quickly. And then finally she said, I need a secretary. And I said, well, I'll call Manpower, which was a secretarial agency that you could get temporary secretaries from in the States then. And she said, no, I'll get a secretary from these letters. A few minutes later, she's on the phone. And she said to me, I found a secretary. I said, well, what do you mean? And she gave me the letter, and it's a letter describing these experiences this woman had had. And I said, well, how do you know she's a secretary? It says here she's an actress and a singer. And she says, have you ever heard of her? I said, no. Well, look at her handwriting. That's a secretary's handwriting. That's a professional handwriting. So she's a secretary. She'd like to be an actress and a singer, but she's making her money secretarially. And she, not only that, she lives right around the corner. So she called her. And I hear her say, so do you have secretarial skills, don't you? And then she says, oh, good. Well, how would you like a job? And she says, oh, good. Well, come over right now and we'll get started. She was Anne's secretary for 15 years. and she was and is a wonderful person. She's called Lori Barnes, and she had a direct close encounter experience at our cabin in upstate New York. But they together cataloged all of these letters and had 600 or 700 of them typed up. They typed them up. Lori typed them up. And they're now at Rice University in an archive that is being studied by, I think, 6 PhD students and master's students, and is considered one of the, if not the biggest archive of modern folkloric narrative in the world. And as everybody says, if the close encounter experience turns out to be something real, then it is probably one of the most important archives that's ever been assembled on the planet. Because from this archive, you're going to be able to figure out exactly what's going on from all these stories. And Anne created that. But in the process, she came out of her office one day and she said, you know what, Whitley? This has something to do with what we call death. And with that sentence, she began the next half of our life together. Because letter after letter, not every letter, but a good 10 or 15% of them at least, mention experiences where the dead were part of the experience of the close encounter. I'll give you an idea of what I mean. She was also quite skilled at getting people up to the cabin who would have close encounter experiences there. I wouldn't say she had a sixth sense about it. She just knew from the tone of the letters and the descriptions the people that the visitors had had a successful time with and had not had a great violent fear reaction and so forth. And those people, the visitors, were comfortable coming to be with at the cabin because they knew they wouldn't have a fight on their hands, not like with me. Anyway, so they would come up to the cabin, and we always knew when people would begin to report the presence of the dead in the afternoon, like it happened to Laurie Barnes, in fact. She was out walking on the road in front of the cabin, and she suddenly encountered her brother, which was amazing because he disappeared 20 years before and had never been seen again. The FBI had closed the case and missing, presumed dead. And there he stood, and she said to him, "My God, how did you end up here? Come down to the cabin and meet my friends." And he said, "No, I just wanted to tell you I'm all right." And he drifted back into the woods with a smile on his face and disappeared before her eyes. As soon as Laurie came staggering back to the cabin saying this happened, Annie says to me quietly, "The visitors will be here tonight." And they were. And she and another woman, two other women encountered them and during the night as they moved from room to room. It was a big, complex experience. We don't have time to go through the whole thing now. But that was just one of the occasions in which the dead appeared. Another time, there were 5 or 6 people sleeping in the living room and on cots and things, and these little dark blue beings that we call kobolds came into that room and were jumping around, and the people were all wide awake, but they were paralyzed. They couldn't move while this was happening. They could see it happening and hear it, and they could talk to each other, but they could not move. Meanwhile, in the basement, in a finished basement bedroom, a couple woke up to find an old friend of theirs standing at the foot of the bed as big as life, saying, "I just want you to know I'm all right." And she had died in an earthquake 4 years before. I myself, on my first close encounter experience, had a friend there someone I knew who had joined the Central Intelligence Agency when we were out of college. And I had thought I didn't know what he was doing there, but I thought that was early on that maybe I had been drugged and that they were doing something awful to me. And so I called him and tried to find out there was something more about what had happened because he was right there. I saw him and talked to him. I couldn't get him. His phone was disconnected. So I called his brother, and his brother said, "Well, he's been dead since last March." And this was now, I guess, February of the next year that I made the call, and the experience had happened in late December, while he had been dead for months. So it's all, and there are many, many stories, but we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I'll tell you one more. I think we have some time.
We have about 15 minutes left.
Okay. Here's another one. This is a powerful story. A FAA inspector living down in Georgia in Atlanta was in his living room with his wife, and their old dog was asleep in front of the fireplace. He'd been taken out, and he was ready to go spend his sleep for the night. Their little boy, 7-year-old, was upstairs in bed, and suddenly the dog becomes very restless and gets up and seems to want to go back out. And so the wife says, "Well, maybe he's not finished," and took him out. And as she opened the door, she saw a fireball go racing across the sky and disappear beyond the trees at the end of their yard. She calls to her husband, "I just saw a plane going down in flames. You're going to get a call in a few minutes," because he would be called to the scene immediately. but nothing happens. But then their little boy at that same moment comes running down the stairs saying, "Daddy, Mommy, Daddy, Mommy." Little blue men brought Johnny into my bedroom, and he wanted to tell you that he's all right. And the reason this was so powerful is that this boy was 17 and he had died the week before in an auto accident. And this guy had moved heaven and earth to find me and talk to me. And he said, "Mr. Strieber, do I have any reason to believe that this happened?" And I was able to say to this poor guy who's lost his son, "Yes, you do have reason to believe it happened. It happens like that a lot, that these experiences with these strange beings coincide with contacts with the dead." And that was where our interest in the whole afterlife started. And it's why the afterlife revolution is like a period on a sentence. The sentence started with communion back in 1987 when it was published. And the period on that long sentence of contact with this wonderful world beyond is the afterlife revolution.
Very powerful. And
Well, it certainly is.
do you, with this book, and I've recommended books to friends before. I rarely rave about a book like I've done this one recently to people. And I think a lot of it is because how it affects me personally. There's a lot of ideas in there that have been around for a while, and a lot of new ones. I think it's the way the way you've worded them, and you and Anne have come together to present them in a way that it's really striking a chord with me, and specifically because of my loss. And I can certainly relate to it. In fact, I got the Audible version of the book, so I got to listen to you tell it. And knowing how when we do our radio shows and podcasts, how long and how much it takes, I wonder how tough that was for you to do, because recounting a lot of those, I bet you took a lot of different takes. Because I talk about my brother and I choke up.
It was hard. It's hard to do that. That's a real skill and a challenge. But the most difficult part is the technical part of it, because the thing has to be so silent. It has to reach Audible's technical specifications, and I had to do many redos because of that. It was very hard. But also, it's so important that your spirit be in the tone of the words. You have to be there every second. Because if you zone out inwardly, the listener will zone out immediately. This is when you listen to Audible books, sometimes they're wonderful. Some of the readers are brilliant. Other readers are not. Don't. You can hold on to the story, but they don't grab you with that same intensity. But this had to be special because it had to have my heart in it, my real heart, not an actor's heart. And so it was hard. It was very hard.
Now, I know that throughout the years with you first coming out with Communion, talking about your UFO experiences, the visitor experiences, you've had a lot of criticism over the years. And, I was even reading the reviews on Amazon. There were a couple of really nasty reviews of people just, accusing you of just either not letting go of your wife and hanging on to it, or making a buck on her name. And there's some sad people out there. That's
nasty.
That's very nasty. But that's the internet age we live in. Especially, people feel that they can say whatever they want. But what do you say to people who say, well, are you really talking to your wife? What makes you know that you're talking to your wife, rather than maybe you focusing on you miss her so much that it's creating a type of delusion?
Well, sure, but at the same time, the book is filled with the names of other witnesses and their descriptions of what happened with them. It's not like this woman said and that woman said. It's Lori Barnes said, or one particular people, specific names, and those witnesses will all stand up for what happened to them in their lives when Anne contacted them after she died.
I don't think it really cares what other people. I don't think I'd really care.
There are 2 or 3 negative reviews on Amazon. One of them is from a man named, I believe his name is Jason Horsley. He goes by some pseudonym because they're all trolls, and trolls do their reviews. They use disguises. Because
we have had our fair share of experiences with them. Yes,
yeah, exactly. So the result is that he's an autistic man, and he says that all of the voices in the book sound the same. In other words, what Anne says in the book sounds like Whitley, and what the other witnesses, he doesn't mention the fact that the other witnesses are all named and easily contactable. They're not hiding at all. And that's because he's autistic and he can't tell the difference in tone of voice when he reads something. He can't. So he does believe that. He believes his own lie, I'm sure. So it doesn't really. It's a misapprehension caused by his illness.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what anyone thinks, really. It's what you feel inside.
Yeah.
You know. And
but it's more than that. I wouldn't have published a book if I didn't have corroboration. No. If you look back across my whole body of work, you will find that most of what I have written about are things that are witnessed by others who are named again and again and again throughout 30 years of this work. Of course, the people who want to deny it all ignore that.
Yeah, and it's not only that. It's people like me and Mark that felt that book, that knew.
Yeah.
You just know.
That's why, there's 100 great reviews, most of them 5-star on Amazon.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those books that I recommend for people, especially if you have lost somebody close to you. What I liked about your approach, and I credit you and Anne's approach to the material. I've read many past life books, everything or near-death experience books from Brian Weiss's books and others, and they recount a lot of these experiences that people have had. But with this one, it was refreshing in that it was taken from a lot of it, so much from Anne's perspective and her wit and her humor, and not describing what it's like over there so much as it is describing how it is to communicate and interact with us here.
Yeah, she's not going to tell me much about what it's like over there. She has said we are light alive. And she said a few other things along those lines, but it's mostly about communicating. And, there's plenty of stuff about what it's like over there. And as she says all the time, I'm right here. And given that she's right here, my guess is that it's pretty much the same where she is as it is here, because it's the same place, just from a different perspective.
Now, is time... Does she perceive time differently than we do?
Yes, very definitely. I think that she sees... I don't know that duration has the same meaning there, because I think they know more of the future. Like, for example, last September, I asked her who would win the election. And she said Trump immediately. And I thought, that's my imagination, because he can't win. He's an idiot. And he's way behind in the polls. And then I said to her, well, what will he do? And she said, not much. And he did win. And he's not done anything like what he intended to do so far. He's been thwarted almost at every turn. So that can happen from time to time. She does know the future better. And a lot of the Afterlife Revolution is about how we could improve our our accuracy about our expectations for the future if we were in touch with them. But there's another thing, another aspect of it, and she's said there's an exchange in the book where I ask her, can you tell me the future? And she said, I just did. And I say something like, I didn't hear a thing. And she said, you can't hear us when we talk about things that you're going to filter out, or words to that effect. Because if we know the future, it ruins our reason for being here. We're here to be surprised by the incoming, when the future becomes the present, and to react out of essence to what comes in. That's where we're gaining our energy and building our souls, is at that point. And we will resist this. We will resist being told too much about the future.
Well, there's also, if we take into consideration what we mentioned before, is the fact that if we are dealing with the idea of there being multiple parallel realities where they're all variations of this reality, what is the future? Because what could be the future for one reality is different from the other. It could be, instead of jumping to your left when a car is coming, you jump to the right, each one causing maybe a breakaway into a different version of that reality. And maybe that's why it's so difficult to see what is going to happen in the future, because there's so many variables that could play out.
Yeah, exactly. It may be that there are always too many variables to really predict the future. I don't know the answer to that question, but I have really wondered, is she is there something, what is the place like that she's in? What does she do? I mean, what do any of them do there? And I do know that they do want to project bodies, that this is something that they want very much to do. They want to have bodies, and I think Annie will reincarnate eventually and become a body again. But she tells me that will not mean that she's no longer with me, that she says, I'll always be with you. And the fact that I have a body doesn't mean that I won't also be in this state. It's just that the body can't know that part of us is in this other state. So on another level, the living and the dead are together. We're together. Those of us who are in the physical level of consciousness don't know it. We filter it out.
Again, this is why I'm at this stage in life where I'm just fascinated by everything, because there's so much that I feel has been around us all this time we've ignored, and now it's like, a blind person finally seeing, at least hazily. I can't say that I see the whole thing, but just seeing these things, seeing how marvelous the universe actually is and the things that are happening around us. You just seem to learn more every day. Now, we are coming up here on the end of the show. So, Whitley, where can people find the Afterlife Revolution?
On Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's available in the UK, and I believe the audiobook is available there too. It's available for Kindle and paperback and in every way in the UK.
And we'll also let you plug your radio show again. When can people tune into that?
There is a new show on unknowncountry.com every Friday. At Dreamland every Friday. It's been going for 20 years. And there's also another show by a wonderful guy called Jeremy Vaney, who's half of the way across the world from you. He lives in Hawaii, called The Experience. And that's live every Wednesday. And you can listen to the first half of both of these shows with ads in them for free. But if you want to listen to the whole show and take advantage of the site's gigantic archive of programming, you have to subscribe, and you can do that for $5 a month.
Great. Well, Whitley, I just wanted to personally thank you for coming on the show. I know Irene and I have both been sitting here totally enraptured in discussing this, and there's so much to think about.
Absolutely gobsmacked there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I'm glad, and I hope that your listeners found it helpful.
I'm sure they will. I'm definitely sure they will.
Pick up the book, people. You will really get something out of it. And thank you, everyone, for listening to another edition here of Paranormal UK Radio.
Do you know something? I nearly butted in and said unknown origins.
Oh, you know what? I get so used to saying that sometimes, too, it pops in. Yeah. But Paranormal UK Radio, folks. Catch you later.
Yeah.
We'll see you all next week. Have a good one. Irene, take care. And Whitley, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.